Well, I was initially attracted by Tony Grisoni's script, or scripts. I read all three, and I suppose I was bowled over by the atmosphere and the sort of compulsive nature of the story, and the way that certain things interlinked over the years and in the different films. I thought it was very interesting as well the way he'd taken, whether David Peace actually had taken real life events and fictionalised them and woven that into this sort of very fast moving thriller noir story. I was fascinated by the facts, and I suppose I've tried to play it up in the way I've directed it, is the fact that there are these dreams where Eddie does begin to get clues about what's happening. He hallucinates after he's been beaten up by the police, and they give you and he begins to put together in his subconscious some of the ideas that he's playing with, and begins to get a little bit closer to the truth. But it was very much the mystery, the things that aren't known, those slightly surreal elements, the violence that seems to creep up from nowhere and then disappear, that I found interesting, and I think an audience will too. I've always loved the 70s conspiracy thrillers, the American conspiracy thrillers like Parallax View, All the President's Men, 3 Days of the Condor, Clute, and I thought it had something of that in it, the way that there was something sinister and dark, but it was always around the corner, it was always unknown, and you were trying to sort of penetrate this sort of closed community, whether it be a corporate community or a police community. Well, I mean, in some ways I think it was a sort of golden age of Hollywood, where people were allowed to be a little bit more experimental, where endings and plot developments were a little more ambiguous and darker and stranger. Things weren't necessarily neatly tied up in a bow, and sometimes the lead character was dead at the end, sometimes he hadn't got what he wanted. Eddie Dunford he's the eyes and ears of the audience, so he has to take you on that journey, and it's asked for quite a lot in this story, because he's also not the obvious sympathetic character. He's arrogant, he's cocky, he's ambitious, he wants to become the crime correspondent on the Yorkshire Post. He isn't initially particularly sympathetic to the fact that this mother has lost her child. So that does, from a conventional point of view, there is a sort of pressure there of how do you make the audience identify with him. And I suppose in the character there is a certain naivety and an innocence. But also it's really down to Andrew Garfield's charisma and the way he reacts in certain situations that is so important and allows you to be sucked in by his performance. So, you know, I mean, actually he auditioned from afar. I think he was in America at the time, so he sent over an audition with I think his girlfriend, who's Californian, reading the opposite lines, so he had this slightly odd Californian Yorkshire accent going on, and it was quite hard to tell from the audition, but I thought there was a real spark there. And I've seen Boyer, which he was absolutely fantastic in, and seemed to be one of the most exciting young actors we have. And he has this sort of edgy, restless, energetic quality which seemed to be right for the script, and it's something I picked up from the book, which has this sort of staccato, edgy, fast-moving kind of feel to it. I didn't want to fall into the trap of making it a nostalgia trip, so one can just sort of get off on the fact that it's the Bay City Rollers, or plaster it with pop songs of that period. So it's not a nostalgia trip. It's hopefully got the flavour and the spirit of that period very, very carefully. And we have John Dawson, one of the main characters, gives you a sort of snapshot of the period in one of his big speeches. Because this is set in '74, and my memory and films one sees in the '70s had a sort of grainy filmic feel. And we're in this sort of bleak, grainy, dark, edgy world. It seemed wrong to have the sort of pristine sharp quality of a video, a digital image, and the sort of more organic, grainy quality of Super 16 seemed absolutely
tráilers.
right.
Visita mi
Beach is
canal.
quite developed now, so it was harder to find locations for the 70s. But Bradford and outside Bradford in the towns, Halifax, New Charleston, there's a lot of these places where you can find areas that haven't changed that much and have very interesting architecture. On this film particularly, we wanted to find modern 50s, 60s, 70s, early 70s architecture, blank modernist, brutalist architecture that sort of reflected the kind of world that it was in, and we did quite a lot of searching to find that. I mean, I prefer to use, whatever the budget, I prefer to use real locations to sets. Real locations, I think they give a realism and they present ideas, and because you can't shoot every which way you want, you have to shoot in certain ways. And I think those restrictions make you more creative and end up giving you a more interesting choreography to the piece. But we did develop a shot really on Eddie, which is where the camera is incredibly close to his face, and we used it often when he's been talking about something but thinking about something else, or when one's burrowing into his sort of unconscious after he's been beaten up and he's been hallucinating in the hospital, and just sort of showing the hallucinatory effects of the pressure he's under. And that was something that we tried on location once, and it seemed to work incredibly well and became a very important part of the style. So for instance with Marjorie in the hospital room, which could be quite a conventional scene, I think it gives it a sort of edgy, slightly paranoid quality by the fact that we shoot it incredibly close. I mean, I suppose perhaps with the scenes with Rebecca Hall, with Paula, which I thought were very successful, very intense, very difficult scenes between them, then there was a sort of beginnings of equal coverage between them, and it was so much about really how she was affecting him and the fact that he was beginning to fall in love with her and beginning to change his perspective. And I think those scenes are particularly interesting, and in that they changed as we shot them and in the editing, because they seemed to work so well as I gave more screen time to them, and one wanted to sort of elongate and add to the sense of his infatuation with her. I mean, I think Sean Bean is particularly successful as this sort of witty, black, dark, frightening, charming, charismatic heavyweight at the heart, and it was really important that Dawson is this charismatic heavyweight, because you wait half the film before he appears, and when he appears he has to really dominate, and you have to understand why Paula is enthralled to him, why everybody is scared of him, why even Eddie for a bit is tempted and almost get controlled by him. I mean, the last scene in the film was a very ambitious one, or second last film in the film was a very ambitious one. It was conceived as a Steadicam shot that started outside the Karate Club, and we track in with Eddie up the steps through the Karate Club, which has lots of mirrors and all sorts of things, so very difficult to film with Steadicam. He then beats up Craven, shoots 2 or 3 characters, sits down, has a dialogue with Dawson, shoots him, and then walks out, back outside, and gets in a car and drives off. And we conceived that on one Steadicam shot with squibs on the bodies of all the people who got shot, and it all worked perfectly for the first 6 takes, except none of the squibs went off, and it was only on the very last take that everything worked perfectly, and fortunately we got it in the can. So that was stressful but very satisfying in the end. It's obviously not a documentary about Yorkshire in the 70s in any way, shape or form, and I steered well clear of that. And at one point there was archive footage supposed to be in mine, and I decided to take it out because I felt it was very much a fictional look at something. Having said that, I think I hope it has caught something of the spirit, and I know David Peace lived in that world. He scrupulously researched that world, so I hope we've got that flavour and that spirit, and the casual racism and sexism and the random violence that was very much a part of the time. Some people may say it's exaggerated, but one could argue about that. But I think the spirit of it, I hope, is true. We shot it as a film, and it has, I hope and think, a filmic quality. The only reason I did it was because I did think it offered a different perspective and a way of telling a crime drama. Yeah. So I hope people enjoy it for that. My work's been associated with either period dramas or comedies, so it was a great opportunity really to get down and dirty in Yorkshire.